For many people, horror movies are nothing more than entertainment. 90 or so minutes of terror in which they can be comforted by the fact that what they're witnessing is pure fiction. The 2001 cult classic Jeepers Creepers is a perfect example of this. What may at first seem as nothing more than a far-fetched story of an unidentifiable creature stalking the back roads of a country highway, preying upon passing motorists, was actually based on a gruesome true crime, with much of the case providing the backstory to the now infamous film. In 1990, 46-year-old Dennis Depew was living in Coldwater, Michigan with his 48-year-old wife, Marilyn. Dennis was a property assessor and had been employed for over 20 years for the state of Michigan at the Treasury Department as a tax specialist, and Marilyn was a guidance counsellor at Coldwater High School. The couple had been married for 18 years and had 3 children, but this marriage was not a happy one. Over the years, Marilyn had noticed that Dennis had become withdrawn, and tension had arisen when Dennis began to accuse his wife of turning their children against him. Their children, however, had also noticed Dennis's odd temperament and began to distance themselves from him. Marilyn often told friends that she was unhappy and confided in them that she wanted a divorce. It was something she'd been thinking of for a long time, and in 1989, she finally filed for one. She told her attorney that Dennis was trying to ruin her life and would not let her make decisions on her own. He was very controlling and could not accept the breakdown of his marriage. Dennis did not want to let Marilyn go, especially after being married for nearly 2 decades. He tried to keep the marriage intact, however the divorce was finalised in December of that year. Dennis was granted bi-weekly visitation rights, but their children were often reluctant to spend time with him. He was also given access to the guest house which he used as an office, but it was believed that he used this as an excuse to maintain control over his family. Marilyn later changed the locks to the front doors of the family home, but Dennis still managed to find a way inside. On one occasion, Marilyn had arrived home from work to find Dennis sitting on the couch. On Easter Sunday, April 15th of 1990, Dennis arrived at the family home to pick up 2 of their children. Their younger daughter Julia had already refused to go with him, and when he went inside, their son Scott was also reluctant to go. When Marilyn had tried to talk to Dennis, he became angry and began to shout at her. He then grabbed her and pushed her down the stairs. At the bottom, he continued to beat her, even after their children pleaded with him to stop. Their oldest daughter, Jennifer, ran to the neighbour's house to call the police. Dennis then carried a seriously injured Marilyn to his car outside. He told their children that he was taking her to the hospital. They, however, never arrived there. An immediate and widespread search began. Later that afternoon, a couple by the name of Ray and Marie Fortin were going on a Sunday drive down Snow Perry Road near Coldwater when a speeding van passed by them. They noticed that its license plate began with the letters GZ, but did not pay much attention until a few minutes later. What's especially interesting is that the Fortins were playing the license plate game that Derry and Trish play in the movie. They would try to make words and phrases out of the number plates that passed them. As the green 1984 Chevrolet truck passed them at a high speed, Marie won that round. The GZ on the plate made her exclaim, "Geez, he must be in a hurry." The driver then disappeared up the road and out of sight. It wasn't until further up the road, when they passed an old abandoned schoolhouse. Marie noticed the same truck as the one that had sped past them, parked up alongside the building. Only this time, she noticed the driver carrying a sheet splattered with blood. Whilst dumping his wife's body, Dennis assumed that he was alone, since it was rare for anyone to drive along the isolate Michigan backroads where he was located. The pair continued driving to find a phone, and Marie wrote down what she remembered of the license plate. However, their journey was interrupted when they saw the truck coming up quickly behind them. As they looked into the rearview mirror, it was none other than the green Chevrolet. The truck rode their bumper for several miles, driving erratically and trying to run them off the road. Finally, Ray turned off the highway. Marie hadn't quite caught all of the license plate, so they turned around to have another look. As they passed, a tall man wearing a white hat was standing at the back of the vehicle with the doors open, changing the number plates. He'd also left the passenger door ajar, and the interior was visibly covered in a large amount of blood. They also noticed blood on the passenger side door. They decided to return to the old abandoned schoolhouse where they found the bloody sheet in an animal hole. The animal hole that Dennis had tried to push the sheet down wasn't large enough, and when Ray and Marie went back to see what Dennis had been up to, they found it sticking up out of the ground. When police and forensics arrived on the scene, the Michigan State Police and the Sheriff's Office had already begun their manhunt for Dennis, following on from the call from their daughter Jennifer. The area was taped off, and nearby forensics found tire tracks and a pool of blood. The treads would later be linked to Dennis's truck, and the blood was matched to Marilyn. The next day, Marilyn's body was discovered in the brush next to a quiet road, halfway between her home and the old abandoned schoolhouse. She'd been shot in the back of the head by her husband. In the days following his wife's murder, Dennis went on the run and sent several bizarre letters to family and friends. In total, he posted 17 letters with various postmarks from across East American states, including Virginia, Iowa, and Oklahoma. They were full of long rants where he had tried to justify killing Marilyn. In one of the letters he stated, "Marilyn had many opportunities to treat me fairly during this divorce, and she chose to string it out, trick me, lie to me, and when you lose your wife, children and home, there's not much left. I was too old to start over." After this final letter, Dennis seemingly disappeared, with no trace of him being found. However, 3 months after Marilyn's murder, Dennis sent out yet another letter. This time, it was 13 pages in length and quoted verses from the Bible and contained more long rambles. This was the last of what was heard of Dennis Depew. This case aired on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries on March the 20th, 1991. At 8:30 p.m. on the night of the broadcast, 1 year after the murder, a woman named Mary arrived to her home in Dallas, Texas. She had noticed her boyfriend's van sitting out in the driveway, unusual because he usually kept it inside the garage. When she went inside, her boyfriend, Hank Queen, told her that he had to leave soon because his mother was sick. Hank had kept an interested eye on the Unsolved Mysteries episode that was playing on the TV. As he gathered up his clothes and personal items and packed them into a suitcase, he had asked Mary to make him some sandwiches in the kitchen, a ploy to keep her distracted so she would not see the show. The second half of which featured a man named Dennis Depew, wanted for the murder of his ex-wife. Hank left a few minutes later in his van. As he waved goodbye, the woman had a suspicious feeling that she would never see him again. Mary's friend would be the one to call into the hotline, reporting her friend's boyfriend as none other than Dennis Depew. She gave the operator his license plate number, and this number plate turned out to be the false license plate number that law enforcement already had for Dennis Depew. Mary was able to provide information as to where she believed Dennis may be headed. It took Dennis 4 frantic hours to drive into Louisiana, then across the Mississippi state border. Louisiana state troopers had already spotted his van, and he soon led them on a 15-mile high-speed chase, refusing to be pulled over after he had already broken through 2 police barriers. Warren County Sheriff Paul Barrett told his team to shoot out the truck's tyres if they couldn't stop Dennis, and they succeeded, hitting both back wheels. Dennis, however, had managed to drive on the rims for half a mile before the car eventually gave up and stopped just before 4 a.m. He desperately shot at officers with his gun, with 2 going through the windscreen and 1 through an open window. In a final desperate act, he then turned the gun around and shot himself once in the head. Dennis was later buried at Eagle Cemetery in LaGrange County, Indiana, far away from his wife's final resting place in Oakland County, Michigan.